I called him uncle for years, but my heart always called him something else. Why did you call him uncle all this time? I looked at the question like it was fire too hot to touch, too dangerous to ignore. I was 8 years old the first time I met Luke. He came through the front door like a ghost wearing a Marine Corps uniform, tall, square-jawed, and distant. My mother stood up so fast from the kitchen table, her tea spilled everywhere. Luke, she breathed like his name was both a question and an answer. My, he replied, and then turned to me. And this must be Min. I nodded. My voice got lost in the panic of his presence. That night, I whispered to Mom, "Is he your brother?" "No," she said too quickly. He's your uncle. That's what we'll call him." And so I did. For nearly 15 years. Texas summers have a way of boiling secrets to the surface. You can feel it in your skin, in your lungs, and in the way people look at you when you walk too close to the wrong part of town. In our neighborhood, we were the only Asian family on the block and the only ones who never really explained where our uncle came from, or why he lived with us off and on since his last deployment. But Luke wasn't like the other men in our community. He didn't drink beer on Friday nights with the others. He didn't talk about football or barbecue. And he didn't flinch when I told him I liked boys. He just stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Good." That was the first time I ever cried in front of him. And the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, someone saw me. High school was hell. Being gay and Vietnamese American in a small Texas town wasn't exactly the setup for a Disney Channel original. I got shoved into lockers, called names that still echo in the back of my mind. I hid behind sarcasm, fake girlfriends, and hours in the library. I kept my head down. But Luke saw me. When I came home with bruises, he didn't ask. He just handed me a frozen bag of peas and said, "Hit back smarter next time." When I failed my driver's test for the third time, he took me out at dawn, without a word to Mom, and let me stall the truck in the middle of a Walmart parking lot for 2 hours straight. When I told him I wanted to study writing, not engineering, he didn't laugh. He said, "Then you better write so well they never ask what your parents think." He wasn't my uncle. Not really. Not even close. But I called him that anyway. Because what else could I call the man who saved my life without ever claiming he was trying? The night everything changed was one of those humid August evenings where even the air feels exhausted. I had just graduated high school. I was packing for college. Luke was back from a long stretch in DCA, consulting job, he said, though I never believed a word of it. Mom was working late. It was just the two of us, again. We sat on the back porch, passing a bottle of Jack back and forth like we were equals. I was 19. Barely legal. He didn't care. "I ever tell you why I joined the Corps?" he asked. "No," I said. "But I assumed it involved a girl you were running from." He laughed, low and bitter. "A boy, actually." My heart skipped so hard I nearly dropped the bottle. "You?" I asked. Luke didn't look at me. Just stared into the night. We were kids. He kissed me in a hayloft behind the barn his daddy owned. I kissed him back. His father saw. Beat us both bloody. I shipped out a week later. Never saw him again. Silence stretched between us like a wound. "Does my mom know?" I asked. "She does now," he replied. "She always suspected. But I told her when I moved in. Told her I'd keep it quiet. For her. For you. And for you?" I whispered. He finally turned toward me. I stopped asking what I wanted a long time ago. I could feel something cracking open in my chest. Something terrifying. "Maybe you should ask again." We kissed that night. Once. Just once. It wasn't fireworks or violins. It was messy and scared and so full of history it nearly drowned us both. But it was real. It was the first honest moment of my life. And it was also the beginning of the end. Because secrets don't stay secrets in small towns. Especially not when they come wrapped in military medals and skin too similar to mine. We were caught. By accident. A neighbor. A phone left unlocked. I still don't know which domino fell first. But one morning, I woke up to find my mother crying in the kitchen and Luke gone. Gone. Just like that. No note. No explanation. Just absence. Like a goddamn ghost all over again. For the next 5 years, I didn't hear from him. I graduated college. I dated a boy who loved me halfway and another who didn't love me at all. I wrote a book of poetry no one bought, and then another that made it into a tiny queer bookstore in Austin. I sent Luke a copy. I never got a reply. Until last month. The letter came in a plain envelope. Postmarked from somewhere in Montana. Inside was one sentence. I read it. Every line felt like a bruise I asked for. I read it 20 times. Then I booked a flight. I found him in a cabin at the edge of Flathead Lake, older, thinner, and wearing the same damn boots I remember from high school. He didn't say anything when he saw me. Just pulled me into a hug that felt like both punishment and prayer. We sat on the dock for hours, not speaking. Eventually, I asked, "Why did you leave?" He looked at me with eyes so tired they made my soul ache. "Because I loved you," he said. "And that made me hate myself." I nodded. I understood that kind of shame. I had carried it like an inheritance. "I don't want to hide anymore," I said. "Not from anyone." He touched my cheek. "You never did." Then he kissed me again. And this time, it was fireworks. This time, it was home. We stayed in that cabin for a week. Maybe more. Time moved differently there, like the world paused just long enough to let us breathe. In the mornings, he made coffee the same way he always had, black, bitter, but with just enough cinnamon to soften the edge. In the afternoons, we read. Or fished. Or walked the shoreline like nothing in the world had ever broken us. But nights were different. That was when the ghosts came. Luke didn't talk much about the war, or the years in Washington. But sometimes, around 2 a.m., when he couldn't sleep, I'd wake to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, shoulders hunched, head bowed. I never asked what he was thinking. I didn't have to. Some wounds don't need language. They just need a witness. And I bore witness to all of him. The man. The soldier. The boy who kissed another boy in a hayloft and never got to say goodbye. I think he needed that. I think I did too. Do you regret it? I asked one evening, while we sat by the fire. He didn't look at me. Just kept tossing cedar into the flames. Regret what? All of it. Us. He was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard me. Then, I regret not kissing you sooner. I smiled. But it didn't last. Because time has a cruel way of reminding us that nothing stays safe for long. It started with a knock at the door. 2 men in uniform. Civilian clothes, but the posture gave them away. One was young, the other not. They asked to speak to Luke outside. He went. I watched through the window as words passed. Quiet at first. Then louder. Then fists clenched. Luke came back in with a storm behind his eyes. "They're from the department," he said. "Old colleagues. I guess some people in D.C. still think I know too much to live quietly." "Did they threaten you?" He shook his head. "Not directly. Just a friendly reminder that ghosts don't retire. They haunt. And me? He looked at me like I was glass. You're not in danger. But I don't want them sniffing around your life. Then come with me, I said. Let's go. Anywhere. He smiled sadly. You still think the world lets people like us disappear? I don't want to disappear, I said. I want to be seen. With you. That night, he didn't sleep. Neither did I. The next morning, I woke up to an empty bed. I checked the dock. The trail. The truck. Gone. Again. He left a note this time. Just 3 words. For your safety. I screamed. I kicked over the chair. Threw the damn coffee pot across the kitchen. It shattered like my chest had. For hours, I sat on the porch and waited for the sound of tires. It never came. I called every number I had. Dead. Disconnected. Back to silence. Back to absence. Back to the ache. But this time, I wasn't a teenager. This time, I wasn't afraid. I went home. And I wrote. I told the world our story, every raw, aching piece of it. I changed names. Not facts. I made it bleed on the page. I made sure the love wasn't erased by the shame. And then I sent it to every publisher that ever rejected me. 2 months later, it went viral. By month 3, it was a book. By month 6, it was on shelves. By month 9, I was on stage at a queer-lit panel in New York, reading from the final chapter. A man in the back stood for the entire reading. He wore a navy coat and boots caked in mountain dirt. My voice cracked. My heart stopped. It was Luke. I didn't speak to him after the reading. I ran to him. No hesitation. No shame. Just 10 years of weight lifted in a single breath. We stood there, in front of 100 strangers, arms around each other, like the rest of the world had finally stepped aside and let us through. He whispered into my hair, "You saved me." I pulled back. "You gave me something to save." We disappeared after that. Not into shadows but into something brighter. Seattle. Portland. Eventually, New Mexico. Places where no one cared who I was with or why I called him Luke now instead of Uncle. We built a house. Not big. Just enough. We got a dog. A ridiculous golden retriever named Whiskey. He proposed on a Thursday. With a ring he carved from old cedar. We got married in the desert, under stars, barefoot and unbothered. My mother didn't come. But she sent a letter. Maybe I was wrong to be afraid. Maybe love is bigger than reputation. I hope so. She signed it, Mom. And beneath it, "Tell Luke I forgive him too." We never had kids. We never wanted to. But we built a life. With music and mornings. With bruised poems and healed hands. With hard conversations and quiet forgiveness. We argued. We made up. We aged. Together. And when his hair turned silver and his hands shook a little more than they used to, I told him. "You're still the man I fell in love with." And he told me. "You were always more than a boy. You were my reason." He died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. Fast. Unkind. Like fate didn't want to give me time to say goodbye. I buried him on a hill overlooking our home. I read one of my poems. The one he used to call Our Beginning. It ended with, "I called you Uncle. But meant everything. Now I call the wind. And hope it carries your name." He left me everything. The house. The journals. The ring. And a sealed letter I didn't open for weeks. When I did, it read. Min. I never believed in happy endings. But you gave me something better. A beginning I didn't think I deserved. I loved you then. I love you still. I'll love you wherever I am next. Luke. I cried until my lungs gave out. Then I made tea. His favorite. Bitter and sweet. And I sat by the window. Watching the wind. Calling his name. The months after Luke's death were the quietest of my life. Not because the world had gone silent, but because my voice had. I couldn't write. I couldn't teach. I couldn't even listen to the songs we used to dance to in the kitchen without feeling like the notes themselves betrayed me. Everywhere I looked, I saw him. In the way the curtains swayed in the evening breeze. In the half-finished crossword puzzle on the table. In the creak of the back porch that still groaned under one heavy boot. Grief isn't loud. It's patient. It waits in doorways, in unopened drawers, in the last voicemail you keep replaying just to remember what love sounded like. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Luke's story wasn't finished. Not yet. It began with a phone call. A number I didn't recognize. A voice I didn't expect. Young. Nervous. Southern drawl so familiar it sent goosebumps up my arms. Is this Mintran? Yes, I said cautiously. My name's Jamie. Jamie Everett. I think we might be related. My breath stopped. Everett. That was Luke's last name. We met at a diner halfway between Albuquerque and Amarillo. He wore a plaid shirt and dusty jeans. Barely 20. Brown eyes just like Luke's, but softer somehow. He ordered sweet tea and didn't touch it. You knew him? He asked, fingers tightening around his glass. Yes, I said, voice hoarse. Very well. He was my father, Jamie said, eyes flicking up to mine. I didn't know until after he passed. I blinked. I don't though. He pulled a photo from his wallet. Luke. Younger. Smiling. Next to a woman I didn't recognize. Holding a baby. I found it in a box with my birth certificate, Jamie said. My mom told me before she passed that he was in the military. Said he couldn't stay. That he had obligations. I couldn't breathe. I googled his name. Found your book. Then your lectures. Thought maybe you could tell me about him. I wanted to laugh. Or cry. Or scream. Instead, I nodded. I can. And I did. 4 hours. I told him everything. The porch talks. The fights. The silence. The poetry. The way Luke used to hum when he cooked. The way he loved with everything except words. Jamie listened like a man starving. And when I was done, he said, "Thank you." I wanted to know what kind of man he was. I smiled faintly. He was the kind who never stopped looking back. Even when he pretended he'd forgotten everything. Jamie nodded. Then asked, "Did he love you?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said. With every part of himself he wasn't afraid of. Jamie and I stayed in touch. It started with emails. Then calls. Then he came to visit the house Luke and I had built. He stood on the porch and whispered, "Feels like he's still here." He is, I said. Over time, he became something I didn't expect. Family. We cooked together. Went on hikes. Watched terrible sci-fi movies Luke used to love. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the cedar ring I still wore and wonder if he was thinking the same thing I was, how strange and beautiful it is to love someone through someone else. We scattered the last of Luke's ashes at Flathead Lake the following summer. Jamie stood knee-deep in the water, arms lifted like he was letting go of something he never got to hold. "I forgive him," he said softly. And I whispered, "Me too." That fall, I began writing again. But not about Luke. About legacy. About silence and what it does to men who love other men. About Asian boys in Texas who fall for ghosts in uniform. About forgiveness. The book was called The Boy on the Porch. It wasn't about me. Not entirely. But it was for Luke. And for every boy who's ever been told that love is something to hide. The book was a success. Not a bestseller. Not a movie deal. But something better. It found its way into queer libraries. Into schools. Into hands that trembled as they turned the pages because they finally saw themselves in ink. I received hundreds of letters. Some from old men in retirement homes. Some from teens in towns even smaller than the one I grew up in. Some from women who said, "I lost someone once. Thank you for helping me remember them kindly." But one letter stood out. It came in a brown envelope with a Montana postmark. There was no name. Just a single sentence. "You saved more than him. You saved me too." I cried for an hour. Then made tea. Then wrote a new poem. Jamie got married 2 years later. To a sweet, shy boy named Marcus who blushed every time he said Jamie's name. They asked me to officiate. I stood under an arch of wildflowers, holding back tears, and said the words Luke never got to say in public. "I choose you." Without shame. Without fear. In this life, and if I'm lucky, in the next. After the ceremony, Jamie hugged me tight. I think he would have been proud. "He is," I said. "I can feel it. I'm older now. Lines on my face. Silver in my hair. I live quietly. Teach occasionally. Write always." Luke's photo still sits on my nightstand. Next to it, a dried petal from the desert flower he tucked behind my ear once. I don't need a grave to visit. He's everywhere. In the wind. In the page. In the space between the words I write and the truth I still live. Sometimes I whisper, "Uncle," out of habit. But mostly, I just say, "Love." Because that's what he was. And still is. I started traveling again, the way Luke always said we would when we were old and dangerous. I went to places we'd only circled on maps. Hiked trails we dreamed of. Ate in roadside diners that smelled like coffee and second chances. At every stop, I'd write him a postcard. Not because I believed he'd get them. But because part of me needed to believe he'd want them. On the back of each one, I wrote a single line. "Still loving you from here." In Maine, I met a painter named Rosa. She was in her 70s, wore rainbow scarves, and smoked clove cigarettes like they were her only religion. We sat on a bench overlooking the Atlantic as I told her my story. When I finished, she didn't say, "I'm sorry," or, "That's tragic," like most people did. She just said, "He stayed." I blinked. "He left." "Sure," she said, lighting another cigarette. "But not really. The ones who stay aren't always the ones sitting beside us. They're the ones still talking to us when no one else is listening." I thought about that for a long time. Long after she left. Long after the bench emptied and the waves kept crashing like they always had. Back in New Mexico, I hosted a queer youth writing retreat. They were all ages. All identities. All loud and unafraid in ways I never was at their age. One night, we sat around a fire and passed around a notebook. Each person wrote one sentence that scared them. When it got to me, I hesitated. Then wrote. I still missed the man I wasn't supposed to love. No one laughed. No one blinked. A boy with lavender hair said, "That's brave." I smiled. It was, I replied. And it still is. Some time later, I was invited to speak at a memorial ceremony for LGBTQ+ veterans. I almost said no. The weight of that intersection of uniform and identity, of pride and pain still sat heavy on my chest. But then I remembered Luke. Standing in his boots. His silence. His bravery. His fear. So I said yes. I stood at the podium in front of dozens of strangers, some crying, some stone-faced, and I told them our story. I didn't sanitize it. I didn't soften it. I said. He served a country that never let him serve as his full self. He loved a boy who was told to call him uncle, because that was safer. He died before he could hear the words, "Thank you," without wondering if they were only meant for his uniform. But he loved. And he let himself be loved. And in the end, that was enough. When I stepped off stage, a woman in uniform saluted me. I returned the gesture. Not because I'd earned it. But because Luke had. That night, I dreamed of him for the first time in years. We were back in our kitchen. He was younger again. Wearing that soft gray t-shirt I always stole from his drawer. He didn't speak. Just reached across the counter and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Then he handed me a mug of coffee, black with cinnamon. "Write it down," he said, eyes gentle. I woke up crying. And I wrote. Years passed. The world changed. Laws came and went. Voices rose and fell. But some things stayed. A dog asleep at the foot of my bed. A ring carved from cedar still circling my finger. A porch that creaked under memories, not weight. A name I still whispered into the morning sun. On what would have been Luke's 75th birthday, I stood in the desert with Jamie and Marcus, and their newborn daughter tucked in a sling across Jamie's chest. They named her Hope. "I think he'd like that," Jamie said. I nodded. Yeah. He would. We spread wildflower seeds across the sand, laughing, crying, remembering. "Tell her about him," I whispered. "Even the parts that were hard." Jamie smiled. "I will." Before we left, Jamie handed me a small box. "I found this in one of his trunks. Thought you should have it." Inside was a cassette tape. Labeled in Luke's sharp, blocky handwriting. "For Min. In case I forget how to say it out loud." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't own a cassette player. But Marcus did. So later that night, we sat in the quiet and listened to the man I loved speak from the past. The tape crackled. Then came his voice. "I don't know how much time I've got left. I don't know if I'll ever say this right, face to face. But if you're hearing this, it means I at least got brave enough to try." Pause. "You made me believe in good things. In second chances. In softness. You taught me that love isn't weakness. It's the one strength we get to carry past the grave. You made a broken man feel whole. And if I'm gone, just know I left this world loving you. Loving you more than I was ever allowed to say. Thank you, Min. For everything." The tape stopped. So did the room. So did my breath. And then, like always, the world turned again. I still live in that little house. The porch sags more than it used to. The roof leaks if you don't patch it every spring. The sunsets are still the most honest part of the day. People ask if I ever moved on. I tell them, no. I moved forward. With him in my shadow. In my stories. In the way I hold love now, not like it might break, but like it's worth breaking for. I teach queer lit classes at the university. Jamie visits with Hope every summer. I still send postcards to places we never got to see together. And I still write. Every day. Because some loves don't fade. They echo. They bloom. They find their way home, one word at a time. Sometimes, at night, I sit on the porch with a cup of cinnamon coffee and look up at the stars. And I say, I called you uncle for years. But my heart never lied.